Toby, nice to see you after a very long hiatus.
Very nice to see you.
So today we're going to use the Jamit software and Jamit.io. It's a work in progress.
I wanted to share something first,
Okay,
if I may.
go.
Um, Noted comic book writer Karen Gillan was interviewed today about an upcoming. He's done a comic with a very basic premise, which is a group of kids doing a role-playing game are dragged into the role-playing game. But what he's done is he's working on a role-playing game which lets you play a person who's being drawn into a role-playing game while they're playing the role-playing game. So it's extraordinarily meta to begin with.
Yeah,
But he also said that included in this will be a whole bunch of things that let you play around with coming up with cool ideas and all that sort of thing. And he said something which I thought was really interesting, which is called How to Create Novelty.
okay.
And the way you create novelty is you link an idea and a separate idea.
Okay,
So the example he gave was, I want to set up as a group of enemies a group of Medusas, a group of Gorgons, but what if I make them act just like a group of teenage girls? So you take two ideas and you stick them together, and that's novel.
right. So it's kind of the unexpected, which I tried to do a moment ago, but it failed. Yes, the
Right.
unexpected juxtaposition of two things, and that is the heart of comedy too. That makes sense.
Hmm.
No, it's nice that other people are corroborating these ideas
Hmm.
because you're right. When we jam these things, we often throw ourselves wobblies, curveballs, whatever the expression is,
Yeah.
to say how do we how when one of these things is not like the others, how does it go together, and that
Yep.
forces our brain to work overtime to rationalize and make sense of it. I mean, yeah, I think there's a technical part of this, which is our stream of consciousness tries to rationalize and make sense of every moment of our day, even if it
Hmm.
doesn't make any sense. And there's some studies that are very peculiar where they will stimulate a person's body or brain in some way to make them maybe stand up, right, without any
Hmm.
warning. And that has been initiated by the experimenters. In other words, the person had no desire to stand up; they just were made to stand up. And when they asked the person why they stood up, they'll come up with a rationale like, oh, I'm going to go to the fridge to get something, or I need to go to the bathroom, or whatever it is. And
Yep.
so there's this notion that your stream of consciousness is constantly trying to rationalize and make sense of stimuli that are happening, even if it's all made up, it's all fictitious. It's to give us some sense of continuity that we are in control of our lives and it all makes sense. And when you watch someone whose mind is deteriorating, as unfortunately some of us may have done with family members or things who've
Right.
started to get dementia and whatnot, you'll see their brain constantly trying to rationalize things that, as their brain also inserts increasingly absurd or things that just really don't make any sense at all in the context, they're still
Mm.
struggling to rationalize what's happening because that's what your brain does. And so we are using that to our advantage in the jams because we'll put two things together that are really bizarre, maybe, or don't make
Yeah.
immediate sense, and we'll say, okay, how are these things related? And we will relate them, and in so doing, hopefully find something new, novel, yeah, and interesting. So thank you. That
Mm.
is good stuff, and that's what we're here for. And
Okay.
let's jam it.
All
So
right.
Jamma.io, as I said before, and it's new software. It's work in progress. Things break all the time. Use it at your peril, but also for enjoyment. This is for entertainment purposes only. If you scroll down the homepage, I have started a hosted jam called StoryLiving. That's what we're going to do today, and it's really not very sophisticated. It's based on just some ideas and stuff that we had before involving Disney Moon. And I sent you some stuff. I don't know if you had a chance to look through all of it, but I mean, there
Like,
was a
let's
podcast
do
and
this.
some things, and so you and I are going to enter this jam. So I'm going to. Oh, before you come in, I'm just going to set it up because I have been setting this up like last night. And what is? Oh, yeah. There's nothing there. Oh, there it is. I have to scroll down and get things put away. So I meant to have some of these things hidden. So I'm going to form a deck, and that's going to flip them around, and I'm going to sort of form a deck out of them at the moment because I had to lay all the cards out that I wanted. and then I'm going to hide them a little bit so that it's more fun for us to turn them over and surprise ourselves. I won't be surprised because I set them up, but I will use Toby as a guinea pig. He will have the surprise. So the Story Living is the title, and the reason why Story Living is the title is because Disney has created a Story Living community in California, and there's a link to it here, which has disappeared. Well, that's nice. I did have a link to it, so that's one of the wonderful bugs that I've talked about. So go Google Story Living by Disney, watch the video, and I first just have to ask you your reaction, because I thought this was a parody when I first started watching this thing, and clearly it's not.
No.
And then you told me in our conversation before today that this has happened a number of times. Like I was aware of the Epcot thing that Walt Disney tried to do, but then you told me in another community they tried to do. Was that in the 50s or 60s?
No, that was in the 80s, 90s, Celebration, Florida.
Wow, okay. So I didn't know about that. Celebration,
And
Florida.
it sort of slowly fell apart.
How did it fall apart?
I'm not crystal clear, but it was certainly to do with Disney wasn't delivering on all of the sort of nice things that they promised they would do. And that meant people began to get angry, and then prices started dropping, and then the people who were already there got angry about the people who were moving in who'd paid less. And then it turned out that basically Disney had sort of given its name to another employer, another company that was actually running the place, and they began to just not take care of it very well. And there were reports about how it fell into crime and this and all that and whatever. I don't think it did. It didn't get the support that it needed.
Celebration, Florida. So we have a situation here where Disney himself and then later generations have tried to create a utopian vision in the form of, well, various utopian visions, but several master plan communities, as they call them, to create what they think is a utopian vision of America. The Epcot one, if you go Google Epcot and watch Google's 1966, I think it was, video, a film of the Epcot, it's a very grandiose, I mean, it's clearly going to be an enormously expensive vision to create a sort of adult playground for joy and inspiration, as he says, and innovation.
But, Epcot stands for Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow.
Right, and that is brilliantly a kind of apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, and it sounds like an Orwellian nightmare. So, Epcot is experimental
Prototype Community of Tomorrow.
So why, it's almost like experimental prototype is kind of like obvious, isn't it? It's a prototype. It's going to be experimental prototype.
Yeah, but then it would be Peapod, which is not a good name.
Peapod, I see.
Yeah.
Epcot sounded more hip at the time.
I guess.
Did you, I mean, when I think of Epcot, because I think there is an Epcot, nothing near, obviously, Walt Disney's original vision, but it was pretty lame, I remember, the Epcot Center. Isn't like a dome and then some sort of little phony foreign little areas, like there's a Japanese garden and restaurant or something and some other Swedish tulip thing or something. I mean, it was pretty.
Yep.
It's the kind of thing that as a kid you really don't want to go to. It's like, can we please go to the rides? Your parents say, let's go to the Epcot, and you have to be dragged along because it's really boring.
Yes. Well, interestingly enough, they've now fully given it over. Well, they're starting to put just entertaining rides in there.
Makes sense.
The new Guardians of the Galaxy ride will be in Epcot.
Okay. Before it was just like filler.
Yes.
For something new.
Well, and then so they took away. There was a very good sort of Viking-themed Swedish ride that they ripped out and replaced with a Frozen ride. So that was the first time they put in a strictly entertaining ride. And that's been so successful in getting people to go to Epcot that now they're starting to realize, hey, we've got this whole other land we can put just entertaining rides in. So let's go ahead and do it.
Let's give people some
Yeah.
fun, fun works, which was their original idea. Okay, so I've got some cards. I don't really have a program per se, but I thought that we would throw
Okay.
out our usual kind of juxtapose some things and see what happens. I've created some cards on the right hand side that are blank, that are not blank. I've written on them, but I've written things that I wrote down when I watched some of the videos that I thought would be interesting. And then I've got archetype conflict premises just to see how we can shape our discussion. So the first thing is, this is a story living community by Disney. We had a jam called Dreamboard Jam where we used that image of Mickey Mouse, sort of a forlorn. I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but kind of abandoned Mickey head. And
Is there something I should be seeing? Because I'm still seeing waiting for host.
oh yeah, I'm in there. Oh, I see, because I didn't actually start the jam. I have to click start now.
Okay.
I didn't do that.
Ooh.
Thank you, thank you. Now you can see what I'm doing.
Now I can see
I
what
can
you're
see
talking
clearly
about.
now. It all makes sense. All right, so I saw your little mouse waving around in there, and I thought you were in there.
You
So that
do.
was a
There it
false
is.
alarm.
Doesn't know what it's
Okay.
doing. Has no idea.
All right. So that's a note to self. Gotta start the jam, otherwise I'm the only one in there just masturbating by myself. Well, no one knows what I'm talking about. Um, so we did a Dreamboard Jam where we had this sort of abandoned Mickey head, and that led us to a lot of interesting ideas. But I'll leave that alone for now. We might sort of remember them as we talk today, because
Okay.
that was sort of fun. But we have here, yeah, a story living. Whoops, my screen is going all over the place. Story living community by Disney, which, I mean, that in itself is a really weird idea. I mean, what do you think of when you hear that story, a story living community? Does that make any sense to you?
No, I mean not as an artificially constructed thing. Not really.
If someone said to you, come stay with me, I'm living at the story living community.
I would run a long way away from them. I'd imagine it was some sort of cult.
Well, it
Oh,
is. I mean,
but
this whole thing is a cult.
I would be afraid that they drunk the Kool-Aid, but in fact, it wasn't Kool-Aid they drank. It was like an off-brand Kool-Aid. So Kool-Aid has been getting all this bad press for all these years. It wasn't Kool-Aid.
Oh man, really?
Yeah, really. It was I can't remember the name of it, but it was some off-brand Kool-Aid drink. He didn't even pony up for proper Kool-Aid.
So it's like janky sauce. If only they could
Yes,
just, say, they drank the janky sauce. They didn't drink the Kool-Aid. If they had drunk the Kool-Aid, they'd be
exactly.
crystal clear and they'd say, what is going on here? Why is this
Yeah.
guy asking me to do this right now? Um, well, a story living community, I mean, the first thing that popped in my head was metaverse because I thought, here,
It was called, here's just so you know, it was called
yeah,
Flavor Aid.
flavor aid. All right, so what's clear the air now? They didn't drink the Kool-Aid, they drank the
Not drink
flavor aid.
Kool-Aid.
So
They
from
drank
this
the
point
Flavor
on,
Aid.
it's the flavor aid. So story living community I thought was very metaverse. And I thought this was funny because we're talking about the metaverse in a digital terms, always thinking about how it's going to be on blockchain, it's going to be this digital thing, or it's going to be, various games online that you go in and out of. But this to me was wild because these are people that are living out a fantasy where, like Truman Show, the fantasy is 24/7 and they're role playing all the time. And it just seemed very meta because they're role playing on multiple levels. I mean, one, they're going in knowing that it's a construct, it's a story
Yeah.
living construct. And then they never stop living the story living construct, so it becomes reality. It's not like you can hang your costume at the end of the day and say, okay, honey, let's actually have our real life now. No, it's like you are 24/7 cosplaying some Disney thing and it becomes your reality. And I thought that was so meta. I was like, this is the first metaverse, man. So if you want to do a metaverse investment, people who like to invest in these things, Disney is your metaverse investment because they're the first to market with it.
So, what is attracting people to this? Is it that you think you are somehow going to be surrounded by a community and people who are driven by the ethos and values of Disney?
I suspect that is the undercurrent, yes, because I didn't see all the branding or marketing from it, but looking at if it's a derived from Walt Disney's original vision, in his Epcot presentation, he seeds some words about the values, right? About how this is a community where everybody works and there's no
Hmm.
shirkers, as it were. That's the assumption, right? Everybody's working, everybody's part of this community, everyone's committed.
Yeah. No communist. No
That's
communist.
right. And then we listened to that podcast where they were,
Possibly no Jews either, but definitely no
well, yeah, I
communists.
mean, you look at, well, I mean, even the branding, even the presentation about story living, yes, they have some non-white people occasionally pop up in the video, but when you see the early settlers or the people that are sort of celebrating the opening, there's a person of color sort of thrown in there at the beginning, and then you see it's a bunch of old white people. And when you look at even the video itself, which is more multicultural, it talks about segregated living by age group, right? So already you have these kind of draconian notions of what's proper and what's beautiful and what's appropriate. People have to,
Right.
So I do think that there's going to be, some very strong undercurrent about who's acceptable, who isn't. I don't know if it's, given that it's Disney, it's probably not along racial lines, although the original Walt may have had his own opinions. I think Disney since then has, embraced more multiculturalism out of capitalist necessity. But the other stuff seems kind of weird.
So they are saying their headline thing is where world famous Disney service is at the heart of it all.
Okay. And remember how Walt goes on about the amusement park is a place, it's all about the people. He keeps going on about that, says it's for the people, it's of the people. The people are the deciders of this and that in a very kind of customer focused manner.
It's also got a typo on the first page, which does not inspire confidence.
Oh, okay. What's the typo?
Welcome to a place featuring world-renowned service that puts you at the center of everything.
All right, I'm going to take that. By the way, feel free to drag cards and type stuff and you can type on them by double clicking on them.
Okay.
It's because that last phrase you said, people at the heart of service, what was it?
Oh God. Welcome to a place featuring world-renowned service that puts you at the center of everything.
Puts you at the center of everything. See, I like that because that's the promotional pitch, but it's not. I mean, you are not at the center. It's creating the feeling. He wants to create the feeling that you are the center of everything, and that's just a wonderful kind of narcissist dream. But you are not at the center of everything because you're part of a master plan community where there's a master plan that has a place for you. You have a place in this plan, and you are not the center of everything. So that's already very meta because we have to make you believe, we Disney, that you are the center of the universe, but you're not. You're part of a master plan. So that's kind of interesting. Let me pull up an archetype and just see what happens there. I'm going to flip this card over if I can. Okay, it's not responding. There we go, flip. All right, so these are some things for us to kind of work with. Sentient creature, okay. I mean, the first thing I think of when I see that and it says puts you at the heart of everything, it makes me think like the environment, the community, the heart, the park itself, something is alive and monitoring and watching, and that's working to keep you. That's like the Truman Show idea where instead of some guy in an ivory tower, running the command, it's the AI of the park that is making sure that you feel like you're the center of everything, right? So
there's something else though. This is really, I've only just seen this. In Catino, a story living by Disney community. So whenever you say that, you have to say Catino, a story living by Disney community. A voluntary club membership offers access to a waterfront clubhouse, a club-only beach area, and recreational water activities, as well as Disney entertainment and activities throughout the year at an additional fee. So even within this supposedly exclusive subset of humanity, there is a further exclusive subset of humanity of people who are willing to pay more on an annual basis.
Okay, so I'm writing this down. Like there's gated service, status, economic gating. I also want to keep track of the AI of the park puts you at the center of everything by monitoring everything you do. That's my kind of contribution to that concept. Now, if I can just take this card and move it, which I can't because everything I touch is a selector. So let's see if I can. This is a little buggy here where I want to select the card and move it, and it's like selecting all the text instead. Now, if anyone notices that when I touch the card, it does burp, it does that, and you wonder why, what does that do? Well, it doesn't do anything right now, but the idea is it starts to relate the information on cards to each other. So if I do that, the system should now know that the card I just added is related to the card above, and so that becomes a data set, as it were. So that's being saved as a placeholder for the future. So the positioning of cards and their relationship to each other is meaningful. All right, so I'm going to grab another card from the top of the set that I created before and just see what we have here. Proper control of planning and design. Nice. So this kind of fits into our conversation, which is that putting you at the center of everything, but there has to be proper control of planning and design. Now, this was taken right out of the Epcot presentation video, and again, I can't select things. So let me go to Hand Tool and back to Selector and see if that allows me to select things. No, it doesn't. There we go. Okay, so it's the way that I touch these things. So I think that there's a caveat here about putting you in the center of everything, so long as it's the proper control and planning and design. I found that, listen, when Walt Disney did this Epcot presentation in 1966, people must have thought, oh, this is wonderful, this is so exciting, and they didn't have any Orwellian overtones. But, now, years later, as we've experienced what we've experienced, we have a different, thought about it. And that phrase, proper control, planning, and design, is really weird. That's very Big Brother-ish. So I'm going to move a little quickly because I have noticed that I took so long to get us set up today that in half an hour I have to move on to something else. So I'm going to speed up our jam, which is sad because I love spending more time, but that gives us a focus. All right, so I'm going to put another card. These might be cards that are things that were said or things that came out of the videos.
Okay.
But so Disney Moon, this was our kind of original concept. I'm going to put it over here. And this is, maybe I should have saved this more for last, but Disney Moon is that they terraformed a planet for amusement and made a human zoo. So this was sort of our idea from the Dreamboard Jam. And I think this is where this is heading, is that we had this original idea that maybe, some people land on a planet that appears to have been colonized. They don't know the whole story. They're trying to ferret it out. You see things that you don't understand, and they cross this Mickey sculpture, and of course we, the audience, know exactly what this is now, and they don't. And they're trying to piece together what happened here, and they realize that it's some kind of community that was created as a utopia that went all dystopic. And that was sort of our idea, that it was a community created by Disney, the terraformed planet, because in the future we thought that Disney would become so good at creating these sort of planned communities in space and other planets and whatnot, that they were colonizing places, importing staff to work there, and then having them be sort of utopian communities or amusement parks or whatever. And that was sort of our idea. And you can see that this is not far off from what Disney themselves have been trying to do even now, but wanted to see if we could find another wrinkle on that or another approach to it. And maybe it isn't sci-fi, because it looks like, they're quite keen on making these things in real life. Let me contemplate a conflict of some sort to see if that's useful. Okay, well, impending disaster. It doesn't... If you terraform a planet... why is it that every utopia that we know of tends to go wrong?
Well, but it's also, it could be creating a utopia as an escape from a disaster. So as the Earth slides into, all right, here's the thing. As the Earth slides into environmental apocalypse, Disney terraforms Mars to make it into an amusement park of what Earth, an idealized version of Earth, was.
So it's like yeah. So it's an escape to
So
a better.
it's
Okay.
so Britain would have lots of beef eaters roaming around. It would have some nice punks. Everywhere would have a pub. Everywhere would have that idealistic image from that never existed from nostalgia, but that's what the country would be. France would have everyone in the blue shirts with the onions around their necks, with the baguettes cycling around in berets. This would be, every single country would be the idealized version of it. And
All
that
right.
would take over from Earth. So basically, Earth and Mars would switch places.
Oh,
Earth
I see. So,
is
so
not
you,
habitable,
so just
and
like
Earth
the,
has become this environmental holocaust.
so just like the Disney of today, you would have country ghettos where there would be, and it would be, and because people are kind of separated from the past, they're trying to recreate the past. So it's an exaggerated version, like you're saying, like the French. So it's like full of kind of stereotypes as to what the French, Korean,
Mhm.
Chinese,
Yeah.
American sort of culture is. So you have,
And if you paid more, you would get to live in that idealized bit. And if you didn't pay that annual fee, you'd have to be one of the people working to make that idealized version and keep it propped up, frantically running around behind the scenes, tying the onions into chains, fixing the bikes so they can happily go biking around.
so I mean, of course, in this sort of utopian thing, I mean, the dystopic aspect is that things change, right? So if people can't afford to pay for certain things, they kind of slip down totem pole, and then they end up in a slum or something.
Yes.
So, so is that all part of the master plan? Like then they become cheap workforce, or what is? I mean, in other words, is this a situation where the master plan starts out with something really beautiful in the eye of the beholder, and then it becomes very much like everything else in life? And it's because what human beings are what they are, and you can't
Mm.
escape. There's something about the message of the story is you can't escape human nature or something. Or
Mm-hmm.
let me see that. Speaking of which, let me pull off a premise card and see what happens when I do this. Oh, the screen, guys, keeps jumping around. This is to developers. Stop the screen jumping. I want to move my eye bar over, and the whole screen goes with it, and I'm not in hand mode. So, flip. Not planning ahead is planning for failure. I mean, that sounds like it sounds like the proper control thing, right? If I put that down here, it sounds like these go together. Proper control, planning, and design. I love this sort of control aspect.
Mm-hmm.
These utopian societies very much seem like control is at the heart of it, right? We can't let things go bad or go wrong. We have to, like, the utopian beauty comes from control. So okay, so I'm actually going to think that maybe there's a story kind of message involving control here. Sort of the good, the bad, the everything to do, because control is going to have controlled outcomes. There'll be positives to that as well as negatives, and it's usually the extreme that causes issues, right? That if you have an
Mm.
extreme control, that's when uh, planning. So these three cards kind of start to go together in my mind. That this puts you at the center of everything. There's proper control, planning of design, and not planning ahead is planning for failure. So that there's something dystopic about the notion of the customer is always right to an extreme degree, because to make that a reality, um, there's all these disturbing unintended consequences.
Mm. Hmm.
I'm pulling off another card to see. See, the screen is jumping around again. I need to stop it from moving. I wish I could just lock it. Want to lock the screen, guys. Lock the screen. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yes, unintended consequences is pretty much what I said here. So I'm going to just join that there. Grab another one and see what else came out of the videos. Oop, keep scrolling away. Scrolling away. Hey, keep scrolling away. Utopian open air prison. That was kind of from our original Dream Board Jam, that we thought that what they end up building is a open air prison. It's very nice. It doesn't have walls, but you can't escape.
Right, and if everything is observed by the sentient whatever it is, then it's a panopticon.
Yeah, I like that. You explained that to me last time. Panopticon. Actually, oh, that's wonderful. So this gives me another thought about panopticon, right? That maybe the surveillance is the other people. You know, it's like one of those communities where the people that first moved there are very committed to the idea. And if they see you doing anything that they think is kind of aberrant or contrary to the idea, they police you. So the other members of the community are the panopticon, watching each other all the time. And that's the utopian open air prison. Because if you decide, gosh, you know, I actually feel a little differently, I'm not like everybody else, I want to be a little different, do a little. Now you can't do that. Plus, you can't leave, because that would damage the idea of the utopia, right? If people were to leave, that creates some doubt the utopia is not working. So, if you can't leave, what do they do to you? They have to try to reprogram you. They have to try to convince you, then reprogram you. And if you can't be brainwashed or reprogrammed, things could get very dark. Right? So, neighbors, this is very much like neighborhood watch, police, you know, what's a good phrase about, you know, value the community or something, protect the community. So there's a kind of brainwashing. It's very cult. It is very cult. And I think that was what was disturbing to me about StoryLiving by Disney, is there's something really cultish about it. And they, for such a sophisticated organization, I mean, okay, you know, they've had the rough edges, but they're pretty sophisticated. I'm amazed that they don't see the cultish aspect of this. Or maybe they do, and that is exactly what they're playing into, is they want that kind of cult living. Let's see if another archetype can enter into this story mapping that we're coming up with here. A prodigy. Okay. Who is the prodigy? Maybe there's a prodigy. Maybe AI, the sentient creature, is the prodigy, or maybe it's the master planner. I mean, Walt would need an heir apparent. I guess the person who runs the community, the manager, maybe they are a prodigy. You know, you need somebody charismatic leader to kind of run these communities, right?
Well, I mean, possibly the idea is Boys from Brazil, like, to create this idealistic community to try and create the next Walt Disney by replicating his idealized upbringing, which was not actually idealized, but you'd create, you know, thinking that, hey, if we create these wholesome communities and we tilt them in just the right way and prod them and do that, then maybe we'll get a wholesome president.
Now this is wonderfully weird, because, you know, when we were kids, we were told that Walt was frozen somewhere cryogenically, and they were looking to revive him at some point. So that is a deliciously weird sort of factoid, although factoid I think means the opposite of what we think it means. But I'm going to put that here, because there is that, could be a kernel of truth to, we have Walt cryogenically stored, recreated, or reconstituted. And maybe he's the AI. I don't know. Because one of the wonderfully weird things about cryogenics is that, if they do freeze you, how are they going to get you back again? I mean, the way that it was explained to me nicely is that you freeze a strawberry and you thaw it out. What happens? You don't get a nice original strawberry. You get, mushy strawberry water. So if you want to recreate someone's brain who's been frozen, you're probably going to have to slice it up and sort of recreate it digitally or something, because you're not going to be able to thaw that brain out and get a brain back again. So maybe Walt is the AI, or maybe there is a prodigy, or as you say, Boys from Brazil. There's some way of kind of cloning and bringing back Walt, even if it's just an analogous to that. It's a kind of interesting idea. All right, let's have another premise just for the fun of it. Although I kind of like are not planning ahead is planning for, because that sounds like something that the community members would say, or the manager would say. Not planning ahead is planning for failure. I just like that as right before they decide they have to eradicate someone. That's the beautiful justification. Not planning ahead is planning for failure. We must remove the aberrant personality types before they replicate, because it's like a virus in our community. These ideas will spread, and they're bad ideas, and we all agree they cannot propagate. Monsters are made; they don't come out of nowhere.
Well, that leans into this idea, doesn't it? That the very much the nature versus nurture thing. You're attempting to create something specific in this community, and how delicious if the Walt Mark II that you've created turns against this community.
Oh, that's nice. Like the protagonist becomes the antagonist, in the sense that it's still the protagonist, but now that's them against the whole community. They start to have a crisis of conscience.
The community was originally set up to generate them.
Oh wow. Okay, so let me try to make sure I understand this. So there's some kind of drive from the corporate to create a community, and then to bring back the prodigy of Walt in some way.
Bring back the father figure of that corporation by recreating the wholesome way that he grew up.
Okay. So he's raised in this community. He becomes the charismatic leader of this community, but he has a crisis of conscience at a certain age, because it is not. He starts to see the dangers of it. So the whole community is like the whole community obviously is an experiment, which any utopia would be, but it's a petri dish of experimentation on many levels, and maybe the community is put in some kind of desert area, just like Cotton, the current community, is, because there's a fear that not only do they want to keep people away from the outside, but things could go wrong on the inside. It hasn't escaped their maybe they've done this many times before. This is like version 5.0 because they've had these communities, they've reached a certain point and they've imploded for some reason, and so they keep trying to create these things, but they create them in the middle of nowhere for that very simple reason that things can go very wrong and they need to contain it. Okay, so it's like these experimental communities they keep running the same experiment to raise father figure in the same wholesome community they came from, but it always goes wrong. Goes against the plan, against plan. That's what wrong means. They have a very specific outcome, and it keeps not having that outcome, so they keep starting from scratch. And maybe the people in these communities have no rights because they're owned by the corporation or created by the corporation, just like Disney characters. It's like they're grown on a petri dish. The corporation has ownership over them, and they're just being used to test ideas. In fact, I know there's a card in here that's going to lend itself nicely to this, and see if this is it or not. Okay, mass surveillance, yes, that's all part and parcel of this wonderful thing. But I like the idea that the surveillance actually comes predominantly from the members, the community members themselves. I think that's pretty cool. Insane banality. Well, I'll put that aside. That's something else that I thought would be interesting to talk about. I was able to pull the whole deck aside. That was something I couldn't do before. Interesting. They must be working on that. Come on. Nope, it's not letting me flip that one over. Well, if I don't find it, capitalist fascism. That was something from the from the podcast. Oh yeah, I love this phrase, Disney programming throughout the year. That's one of the joyful things of the community, right? Is that when you live in Cotton or whatever it's called, right? What is it called? It's called Catino. Excuse me, Catino. When you live in Catino, there will be Disney programming throughout the year. I mean, for many people, that's a nightmare scenario, but for the cult, the people that live in this cult, that's wonderful, right? Everything is Disney all the time. So anyway, what I was looking for is the age-segregated communities. That to me is just also so weird. Now I don't know why this card is refusing to respond. I want to flip this one over, and it doesn't like it. So developers, I am clicking on the ellipses like there's no tomorrow, and this thing is not letting me flip it over. So that's a bummer. Master plan residential communities, yeah, okay, that's the concept. I love how benign that sounds. Master plan residential communities. Oh, this is another thing. Okay, yeah, sorry. I'm okay. I can't find it yet, but there's another card that will come up that I know will encapsulate this nicely. So I'll put a pin in that because it'll come up later. But these are two things, these two cards, Disney programming throughout the year, and every moment is more memorable than the last. They came out of the actual Catino video. And the every moment is more memorable than the last to me is kind of a wonderful sort of Orwellian kind of doublespeak type, newspeak type of thing where, I mean, that's true, isn't it? Because every more recent memory is more memorable than a less recent memory. I mean, that's kind of a truism. So it's all these kind of truisms that sound nice, but they're weird. I mean, when people talk to you like that, it's really weird. And somebody in the video says, in all earnestness, every moment is more memorable than the last. and it sounds very pleasant. It's like, yeah, but that's kind of what reality is. Every moment is a little bit more memorable than the last moment by proximity to now. But when people talk to you like that, it's sort of mind-numbing, if you know what I mean. And I think that one of the podcasts we watched pointed out how, Disney's visions for these things look so futuristic and whatnot to him, but the end result to us now is so banal. It's like these sort of plastic, fake, phony kind of communities, and with these platitudes and all this kind of stuff, it feels so artificial that you kind of wonder why do people want to live in that artificial place? Now we know that people like living in artificial reality online, but this is a offline version of that, and it seems like the insane banality of it is what they were pointing out. And I think there is something insanely banal about his visions and Catino and these things, and yet they know there's a target audience for it. So the card I was looking for, which I can't find, is Simulacrum, right? Okay. Magic Kingdom. So I'm going to put this card because I know it exists. And so what I was trying to get at is that these utopian communities are simulacrums that are run as experiments because they're trying to, as you said, recreate the Dear Leader and run a whole bunch of other experiments besides. And so it's almost as if it's Sim City, but with real people.
Right. Yes.
I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at. So what if SimCity was with real people? That's
Mm-hmm.
sort of the what if, I guess. I'll put that up
Mm-hmm.
here. And that kind of real people is also fun to play with because these could be people that are created for story living purposes. I mean, I guess that's the other side of that weird comment, story living community. It makes it suggest that you are an actor. All of you are actors,
Mm.
right? What they call them, cast members, right? In the Magic Kingdom, you are a cast member. So everybody in the community is a cast member, and there's separate casts. So, and I think that's kind of what is the corporate or capitalist fascism, is that you're put into a separate caste. So everybody in the community is a cast member in a separate caste with an E. And they're doing this, or I mean, isn't this the ultimate, isn't the story living community like the ultimate amusement park? Because there's no separation from fantasy and reality.
Yeah. Yeah. No rights to maintain. But that's the thing. What, are other people going to become the entertainment?
I mean, that in Truman Show, clearly that's the construct. It's for other people's entertainment. But in a way, story living is very meta because there is no separation. You know, you are part of the story all the time. There's no escape. There's no escaping the story.
Yeah. No act breaks, no commercial breaks, or lots of commercial breaks. In fact, you are a commercial break.
Well, to me, that's, I mean, Truman Show is dystopic and fun and weird, but ultimately it's not as frightening because there's a realization that they are there for entertainment and that there is a real world. To me, what's more frightening about this is that this is the real world. In other words, there's no escape from it for these people, because even if they were to leave their community and look at the rest of the world, they'd say, "Oh, those people are living in poverty and it's terrible." And it's a bit like, when people come to San Francisco and they see the homelessness. The homelessness is terrible and it is a problem, and we are obliged to figure out what to do, to help people and prevent this downward spiral. But I'm saying that what it masks is the good things in San Francisco, because people see that and they rationalize all sorts of reasons why San Francisco is a terrible, terrible place, an evil place, especially if they're very conservative, because they don't like the sort of experimental living lifestyle, all that kind of stuff that goes on in San Francisco. They use the homelessness as the poster child of a corrupt, liberal, political, economic machine that's corrosive and corroded and degrading, and that's why it is the way it is, and that's the justification. So I feel like this is true of people that leave the story living community. They would look around and say, "God, look how those people live. Isn't that terrible?" They have all these terrible things on their doorstep. They have to worry about crime. They have all this, this terrible stuff. And how lucky we are, right? So it's almost like the Amish. It's like, maybe once in a while you can leave the community because, there's no danger of people leaving of their own free will, because they're going to look at the rest of the world and be convinced that their utopia is really quite nice. So that's the irony, and that's what's kind of frightening about it. Is it's sort of I guess it's a David Lynchian sort of suburban America parable, isn't it? Is that these are people that like being there, and their version of weird is very familiar to them, and It's Orange County on steroids. I shouldn't say that, but it's any community that's very idealistic about the right and wrong way to live, and policing itself and whatnot. It's just that this is a more dystopic version because a corporation is running it, and they're running it as an experiment to achieve a certain goal, and
Yeah.
the people that are in it are part of that experiment, and they may even know it. I mean, maybe they kind of figure it out at various times, but that's okay. They have it good, right? This reminds me of a play, Mandalay. I'm trying to remember the play's name, where it's a sort of look at slavery and control, and in the end, there's characters who sort of say they like being slaves because it's familiar,
Right.
it's what they know, and it's an ordered world. It's a world that makes sense to them, right? So that's kind of what this community could be like ultimately. You in the audience think, hey, this is kind of kooky, blah 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 blah, but these people basically convince you, no, this is a better way of living, and this is why we have this community,
Right.
and they sort of convince you that what you think is frightening to begin with is actually better than the real world.
Well, there you go. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I think that is pretty good. Oh, oops. No, I made something disappear. There's a ton of cards in our stack. Okay. So, that looks like one we've had before. So that's nothing new. I'm going to delete that card. It seems like we have a duplicate there.
Hmm.
Okay. The road, yeah, these are all duplicates. What's going on? Can I pull this one out of the stack if I see what it is? Okay. That's another thing from the video. Always be in a state of becoming.
Mm.
I love that phrase. It's another one of those kind of weird phrases, like every moment is more memorable than the last. Always be in a state of becoming. So this is sort of like the stuff that characters say that's beautiful about the community. We're always in a state of becoming. Right? It's very hopeful. Every moment is more memorable than the last. Oh, there's so much wonderful dystopic stuff. Sorry, I'm amusing myself now looking at whatever worked. Oh yeah, this is another thing they said. Whatever worked became the code. Whatever failed to meet the public need was changed, replaced by a better idea. That sounds nice,
boy.
right? But that's again a part of that control narrative, right? It's because it's not really whatever worked that anybody came up with. It's whatever worked that the authority agreed with.
Yeah.
That's how we define what worked, right? And it becomes the code. It's not just it's not whatever worked became, was implemented as a new idea. It became tested. It's like, no, it becomes the code.
It's like, so in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, in order to convince workers to come and work in these awful factories, employers would build housing. And then the idea was you lived in this housing. All the shops are run by the companies. All the hairdressers, everything else, all the money that you earned just went back into the company, and it did it. But you did that as part of the deal for that's why I'm working at this company. Now they're taking away the factory, and you're just paying to do that. You're paying to enter an Apple-like ecosystem where everything ultimately has its Disney's tentacles in it, be it the Italian restaurant or the nightclub or the beach resort. All of them are going to be ultimately paying Disney.
So that gives me an idea, which is one of my favorite authors is J.G. Ballard, and he loves looking at dystopic situations. And this is a bit Ballard-esque, but I can see a scenario where this is a perfect community, but it's a StoryLiving community. And what that means is they understand the power of story and how, it can't be, to have a perfect community, it can't be perfect all the time. So you have to engineer some threat. You have to engineer something that rallies everyone around. So you have to identify maybe a community member who needs to be purged because they're a threat or a risk. And so you create more bonding between other community members who other that person or those people, attack them, get out some aggression, and then purge and feel like they've reset. And so the Story Living community does this on a cycle to keep the community feeling engaged with what they're doing, right? Because it's like having a war periodically. It's like we need to have a war to cleanse and reset and reaffirm our values, right? And so just as like I used to love as a kid going to the Trader Vic's restaurants where they do the simulated storm every 30 minutes or something. You'd be eating and then the lights would kind of flicker and you'd hear the rain and then the thunder clouds and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, it's so cool. Well, it's like they do that on a kind of cycle to keep it refreshed and renewed. And that's story living, right? Because you need a story. Every story needs a villain. Every story needs a protagonist, a hero. And that's what they do. They create story living so that people feel more sated, more content. Because the problems with utopias is people get lazy, they get bored, they get scared, they start to fall apart because they lack an enemy, they lack a danger. And that's what the simulacrum does, is it says, it's time again to create threat, to unite the community. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there for now. I think that we can play around with some of these things. There's some more cards in there. Maybe we come back to this another time. That's the beauty of it. Just leave it as it is, and see what occurs to us next time. But anyway, thank you for the time you spent.
Thank you.
That is our Disney Moon project, our Story Living. Story Living community. Yeah. And for those who love Disney and feel that this has been a slight, I have to end by saying that as a child, I loved Disney. I loved going to Disneyland. I thought it was a lot of fun. And I think for kids, it is magic. But I think that adults have to keep things in perspective. And when adults start to think it's magic too and kind of get lost in it, then we have a problem.
I disassociate myself from that. I think Disney is entirely magical.
Good for you. I'll see you again in the Magic Kingdom.